stuff, and it's really too expensive for what it's for. But I know I got these disposable plates that are made of leaves, palm leaves, pressed, cut, nothing.
Tiffany, can you hear me?
That works.
Yep.
Can you, when you get a chance, can you validate that the live stream's working?
They're so durable, they had to remind people not to put them in the dishwasher.
Thanks.
Yes, they would fall apart.
All right.
They'll fall apart when you just throw them in the landfill.
Since Bill's here, we can start. I'll go actually get a refill and coffee. So I'm trying to something new this time. I have notepad papers. Bill, you didn't get to hear this, but I printed out like meeting notes. So that it doesn't have, it's blank, it doesn't have any notes on it, but so people can take notes. So if someone else is talking, they can write down a note for themselves to you know, jump in, or just jot down thoughts, brainstorm, whatever you want to do. And there's also a sign-in sheet, and I'll explain why I'm doing that as well. Just a second, to everybody.
Name tags. Name tags. Focus. Name tags.
I was gonna preload them.
Well, why don't you just hand it to them and let them write their own name? It's distinctive, Whose name do you
They had that opportunity already.
Can you read that from their
No,
drill?
that's not.
Screen?
Yeah.
You had to walk.
Cool.
And I'm blind, so if I can read it, it's good.
Cool.
Cosmo already has a name. He doesn't need another.
He should stick this one to his first one.
You have no mechanics and pencils in this entire office that work. None.
I'm not
And
surprised.
you have buckets of them, and none of them have lead in them.
I'm not surprised.
Oh, pencils?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Take it up in the right place.
You are.
There you go.
Prostate program? Financial success?
Sure, I guess this has been all the way around.
Yeah, good. But bring it to the newcomer.
Okay.
Great. So what we do is this format is I just kind of go through, try to do like a lightning round of some information. And then that gets followed up with like interject anytime type dialogue. And we're doing something a little different tonight, which is these like note pages where people can take notes. It was requested by actually more than one person that we do that. So why not give it a try? See if it's useful. Anyway, this is our 24th meetup. That's kind of cool. Who's counting? Anyway, so we start off this thing every time with a joke, and we'll see how it goes this time. Start off everyone with a joke, and I always try. So here's the joke of the day. So why was Noah, and I think by the picture you can imagine what Noah I'm referring to. Why was Noah the best stockbroker of all time? Is the question, right? Well, because he wisely invested in livestock while the rest of the world was in liquidation.
What is that picture?
Oh, that's Jim Carrey with a bird on his head. It's from the trailer of Dumb and Dumber 2. Yeah. Cool. So, and then we always do a quote, famous quote, and here's one: no generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence. All right, so thoughts. What do people think about that quote? Is that good information, bad information, insightful?
His government did exactly that.
Perhaps.
Thomas Jefferson died over a bunch of money.
No, he was talking about the country.
Yes. I was talking about Thomas Jefferson.
So Thomas Jefferson perhaps didn't live by that motto to some extent. But so what is this actually saying? Like, to me, this means, you know, if one generation takes on too much debt, their descendants have to then pay that debt.
Do they really?
Well, I mean, I think that's the essence of this quote, of what it's trying to suggest.
That's why I wouldn't see that in the score at all.
Or maintain the interest.
Well, great. What do you see in it, Ben? How do you read it?
I think that old debts tend to be written down by the fact that nobody steps forward to pay them.
I believe it's unconstitutional, though. They're
Well-
bound by the full faith and credit of the United States government.
Yeah, so that's interesting because from what I understand, there's been a recent quote too by Dick Cheney, I believe, that said debt doesn't matter, right?
Debt is big enough to take care of itself.
Doesn't matter.
Well,
It's-
we owe it to ourselves.
Sure. And from what I've read about debt, pretty much every nation on the planet is in debt to quite a large amount. So the question remains then, if every country in the whole entire planet is in debt, who do they owe the money to?
Exactly.
So-
So, what's your answer to that?
So, well, I think we'll figure out the answer to that during this interesting topic.
So
City of
can
London.
all debt be canceled?
The City of London. Can all debt be canceled?
Yeah.
That's a great question as well. So let's jump right in. This right here is an interesting graph. This is in Ron Paul's book, "And the Fed." I didn't take it from that, but I remember seeing this same graph in that book. And the idea here is that if you adjust for inflation, what a $1 Federal Reserve note means in the economy, this is adjusted for inflation. This is what it means. So, as you can see by the graph, the total value of any given dollar is declined dramatically over time. Purchasing power of a dollar. So,
So, let me
Yeah,
just
sure,
jump
sure.
in, as I want to do, and say that in 1913 dollars, you could pay all of the money in the world 10 times over, and nobody would give you this phone. The value of this phone cannot be measured in 1913 dollars. The things we do with money have no relevance to 1913 dollars. The power of a dollar, by some arguments, because 1,000 of them can buy a phone like this, the power of a 2017 dollar may be infinitely greater than the power of a 1913 dollar. There are many, many ways and parallels and duplicate examples.
sure.
If you've had a medical procedure, the chances are it didn't exist in 1913. And
Sure,
that
so-
probably saved your life. So what's the value of a medical procedure that saves your life in 1913 dollars if it's not available to the king?
Yeah, so I guess throughout the course of, please.
I think that, for me, a common misconception about analyzing things like this is just the notion of what value is.
Yep.
And so when you suggest that this has value, I would posit it has no value unless you use it.
Yeah, or
It has
in
zero
some type of
value
context, right?
unless you use it. And so, when it comes to dollars or some form of value in that sense, it's how it's utilized. And so
Sure.
the power of utilization has changed. I agree with that. But the notion of value, I think, is really critical to any discussion. It has anything to do with money and that type of thing.
Yeah, so one second, I watched a Twilight episode one time, way back in the day, like late night TV, and it was about these bank robbers, and it's kind of like Old West, and they'd gotten in a vault and gotten a bunch of gold, and the posse was on their tail, and they're escaping with this gold, and the gold weighs so much they can't run away fast enough, so they start shedding the gold, right? So in the first case, their escape from the law was more important to them than some of that gold. But they kept some, and they kept going and kept going. And so they went off in a cave, and they hid away in this cave and buried some of it. And one of the guys, they had a dispute, and one of them shot the other. So there's one guy now with all this gold, and over in the corner of the room, there's like this strange effect happening. It's like a portal, and he steps through it, and it's like a time portal. It brings him far into the future. And so nobody's around. He comes out of the cave, and everything's changed. And he's carrying this big sack of gold with him, and he's struggling. It's through the desert. And so he's struggling, and finally he passes out of exhaustion. And two of these futuristic people, like dressed up in future spacesuits, come over and look at him and go, who is he? And, why would he be dragging all that gold? That's not worth anything. Like nobody, that's garden, like it's not worth anything. So the, idea there is that in the future, that particular commodity might be worth nothing, right? And so they just play on that, just remembered it. Thought it was a good story to talk about that value, right? And then if everyone's starving and you have some gold and somebody has some food, who's got the more valuable, right? So value can be very contextual, I think is what the conclusion with that, right?
Two things. The idea of value or money and all of that, it's an imaginary ruler.
Okay.
And we imagine it says something about the worth of a thing to give it a dollar value. But it's always a measure of how much the person talking wants it. It has no value if you don't want it at all.
Okay.
Then there's what could you get for it on the open market. Well, if I had a 1930 Federal Reserve note for $1, I'd have something worth a lot of money, because there were no Federal Reserve notes for $1. There were silver certificates, but there weren't any Federal Reserve notes for $1. Those you got for $10. So the statement itself, value of a $1 Federal Reserve note in 1913, I mean, my God.
So this maybe is relative terms to itself kind of thing here?
It just means that it's an abstract ruler.
Okay.
It's a ruler with no physical meaning. It doesn't mean anything. How much does he want for it? I want it $6 worth.
The meaning comes from bartering. So you're willing to barter for something, right? So the meaning comes from barter. So if you feel as if that's worth bartering for, whatever it is you got, then there's the value.
But only if I got another guy who wants it.
Completely. That's bartering though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's bartering.
So Cosmo, jump in here.
I think that our culture has, with this kind of prevalence of economic thinking, monetarized everything. It's like everything can be bought. And although I don't agree with it, and many of us might not, as far as relationships are concerned, it is one of those kind of assumptions that drive the economy. Anything can be monetized. So that means anybody's service, everything can be bought.
Please.
Definition of fiat money or currency that a government has declared to be legal tender, but it's not backed by a physical commodity. The value of fiat money is derived from the relationship between supply and demand, rather than the value of the material that the money is made of.
Yes, I actually have that in the one of my slides talking about fiat currency. So we'll get to we'll expand on that and what it means for us particularly. Great. So let's keep going here. So this is another interesting little graph that I was able to pull off for this meetup. And what this represents is adjusted for inflation.
Oh, wait a minute, hold it.
Did it fade
I
off?
wanted to go back a little bit because I think there is another point on that. And it's not that we would want to compare things like, let's say, a Model T with a car out there. But what about that value as far as necessities of life, for instance, food and shelter and so on? Can that then be measured?
Are
Does that
medical
graph-
procedures necessities for life? A lot of people will be dead without medicine, right? That's
No,
true.
I think that because of that, the increased technology there, then that would have to be a factor that would be weighed in on that.
So now we're right back to where we started.
Well, I just think that the whole throwing up the impossibility of measuring the value of money as it goes through time is like throwing away the baby with the bathwater. It's kind of like, is there no way that we can track this? It sounds like the Pentagon budget to me.
I don't know. I mean, there's a stone in Egypt with a square hole in it that was apparently used to trade for something, but how could we possibly put a modern value on that stone? I mean, it's kind of like the portal story. There may be no comparable thing, because in some cases, value is entirely imaginable. Take the tulip craze, which some of us might have lived through. I think it happened before my time, but
1700s.
Yeah, but I was,
You're young,
I
hold
was
it.
trying to pull that over to the necessities of life rather than this frilly stuff.
But
let's
maybe currency is a necessity for life. I mean, maybe human cooperation at a grand scale requires that we engage in a form of trade and barter that doesn't involve trading wheelbarrows of bricks for wheelbarrows of straw.
You know,
Well, yeah, sure.
one of the ways that I really am able to grab a hold of all of this, I'm a real simple guy, you know, and I've spent, probably as much time as anybody else thinking about money, right? It's really, in some ways, all about contracts. And so utilizing contracts and the ability to finance activity through contracts. And in this case, it happens to be the dollar or the whatever unit of monetary unit that you have. It's kind of the vehicle that, but it all breaks down to contracts. It's all contracts. Everything's a contract. We're all here because of contracts. Our life is a contract. Can't get away from it.
So, Bill probably has some things to say about social contract, but we'll get into that,
Sure.
I think, in the near future here. So let's look at maybe a couple kind of solidified ways to somewhat nail down this concept of value to go off of what Cosmo's saying. I can give like a really brief example here. My house, for example, has a market value, like what it can be sold for, of approximately $165,000 right now. Okay. Now I have an insurance policy, homeowner's insurance policy on that lists the replacement value for the house. Meaning if it were to, I guess, burn down or a tornado, whatever, if it were to be demolished, what would it cost to replace that house as it is today? And that value is $280,000. So there's this huge discrepancy between what that house is worth in terms of labor, I guess you could call it, labor and materials to rebuild it, versus what the market would then pay for it in its current existent form. So the fact that those two numbers are so widely apart is intriguing to me.
Sure.
And so the market value, I guess we can just simplify as saying what someone's willing to pay for it.
Always.
Right?
What they will pay for it.
Yeah, what they will pay
They
for it.
actually pay for it. It's always historical.
So this is a question that's
Yeah.
sometimes called mark to market, and it has such profound limitations that it can only take you so far. It's kind of like a rowboat. It's absolutely a boat because it floats and it can carry you, but don't expect to be able to ride this idea from continent to continent, right? It's just not sufficiently sophisticated
Sure.
to make the journey.
Mhm.
Mark to market has
And
real problems.
we saw during this financial crisis, right, recent housing crisis, in not too distant history here, we've seen the values of properties swing so dramatically from, in some cases, being worth millions to being worth practically just the dirt that it's on. So, it's just interesting how it's kind of a good showcase of how subjective,
Sure.
value of anything could actually be. In this fiat currency and monetary system that we have in most countries now, that's not backed by anything tangible. I guess you can say it's backed by the gross domestic product or the what's the word, the economic potential of the society. I guess you could say that's what actually backs it. But it's not redeemable in gold. I mean, you can go buy gold, but I'm saying you don't take your dollar to the bank and then they give you a certain amount, a pinch of gold, right?
It might be backed by uranium.
Backed by uranium? Well, I think another way it might be backed is by, I think another thing that we might be able to start pinning value on is energy, which is an interesting, maybe universal through time kind of guidance that we can use, but maybe we can get into more detail with that as well. But this whole thing about this fiat currency and kind of the values almost tends to be what people believe the value to be. Is that so kind of like what you were saying, Michael?
Yeah.
More or less? Because if tomorrow everybody lost total faith in the US dollar and said, no, I don't want that, I want something else instead, realistically the value would go to zero. So it doesn't necessarily hold any genuine, tangible value. Yeah.
What is the basic question that we're trying to answer? What, if you put that in form of a sentence, you know, what is the, are we asking, what does value mean? Or what is the basic question?
We're trying to figure out how the money system around the world kind of works, United States, and then maybe broader the world, like how it works, and then hopefully come to some ideas on how maybe it could work better or how it should work, how we think it should work. And we're kind of just in a little bit of a sidebar talking about what value really is, because it does seem intrinsically linked to understanding what money is to try to understand what value is. So I didn't expect the conversation to go there, but it makes sense that it did. Yeah. Yes, please.
So just to comment on your last comment, which is that the American dollar tends to have a lot of opinionated value. It's sort of worth not only what we think it's worth, but the rest of the world thinks it's worth.
Sure. Good point.
I think it would be a selection bias to take too much from that, because there are many currencies in the world and not all of them have the same amount of premium that the American dollar carries by virtue of being the most widely used and trusted currency in the world.
There's a reason for that, though.
Should that fail to be the case, we may have a currency that's far more rational. And I think there's a lot of countries have currencies that may tend to be more, well, based on more tangible and local phenomena than the U.S. currency. It might be general. It might be that all currencies have this quality of being infinitely fluid or, inexplicably variegated.
From what I understand, the U.S. dollar is more or less the reserve currency for the world. From what it is the primary medium by which most commodities are internationally exchanged. Fair enough. And it carries massive weight, and there's many reasons for that indeed. The thing I find interesting.
Uranium is one of them.
Yeah, sure.
It's linked to the price of oil.
No, it's linked to the number of nuclear bombs.
Well, that and you're talking about energy,
Mm-hmm.
So that's the segue there. That's a fundamental change with attitudes towards the U.S. dollar, because you have to enter into these contracts.
You know how you go to dinner and there's these like big plates? I think they call them chargers or something. The plates that go under the plates. I don't know. I'm not pinky out when I drink tea kind of guy, but I think it's called a charger or something.
Yes, it is.
All right. Napoleon, back in his time, he ditched all the silver ones and replaced them with aluminum ones, because aluminum was so much more impressive back then than
And more valuable.
Yeah, and now I tear it off of a roll and use it to reheat bread or something. It's like now it's disposable. We just chuck it. It goes in the trash. So the means by which technology is now able to extract aluminum, which is one of the most abundant elements in the crust of the earth, has gone crazy comparatively. Aluminum was very hard to obtain and forge into anything back then because of the rarity of it, how difficult it was to extract it from the earth. So if you look at it from an energy perspective, it's now really easy to extract aluminum from the crust of the earth, so it's a cheap, disposable commodity. So look at it from the energy perspective, it would take armies of men with pickaxes, right, and shovels, digging into the ground to try to get little tiny bits of aluminum was a big deal. Now, mechanization, it's disposable. So that's just interesting. Another way to start to pin value on something is use the concept perhaps of energy. How much energy does it take in the modern context to produce something? Might then have some type of indication of what it's actually worth, quote unquote.
I think there's a difference here between cost and price.
Cost and price. Okay.
Yeah.
And these are all important terms for the conversation of money.
Yeah, because the cost of something and the price of it are not as strictly related as you might wish to believe. Many things cost you more than they cost to make by considerable margins, or usefulness or value. What did I do?
Your guest.
What happened?
Sorry.
She warned us about this when she was there.
What happened?
Okay,
So,
so,
Tiffany, do I have to close the lid on the laptop temporarily?
Sorry, I did cover him coming in. I just didn't realise he'd come up behind me. Sorry.
Tiffany, we love you.
It's not on the live stream, so I'm only facing about a dozen lawsuits. Thank you.
but when you talk about the things that back your currency, that goes to metal-backed currency, gold-backed or whatever. And it's based on the fiction that you could take all of your dollars and go to the Federal Reserve and get whatever it was they were backing it with.
Shut the door.
And they're not going to give you any atomic bombs, no matter how much money you have. And at one point, they finally realized that if everybody comes for their gold, we don't got that much gold.
Right.
And so we don't want to
Sorry.
devalue our money to where we got that much gold now, because we don't, all of these things have come up. And the last nation to have fiat repayment by gold was South Africa. They haven't for 15 or 20 years. And before that, it was the 30s, it stopped being done. So basically, at that point where it came unplugged from any physical, actual object at all, like any other measurement system, it became much more a matter of opinion than a matter of measurable fact.
Sure.
And in the United States, that opinion is controlled by the Federal Reserve Board.
So has anyone in this room ever done this kind of when they're shopping or otherwise looking to buy something? Gone and saw the price of something and then thought about how much they made per hour and then said, I'd have to work X number of hours for that. You ever done that before?
No.
Like I've done that so many times, like in my life, where I've seen the price of something and been like, man, that's like 4 hours of work. No way, it's not worth it anymore. So I've like used my own internal measurement of value, right? Saying, I had to work 4 hours for somebody else to, to afford that thing. It's really not that important. All of a sudden, it's not that important to me, right?
I get money in birthday cards. I don't want that.
So your aging is now your currency. That's great.
How many birthdays would you have to get that? I'd be 40 by then.
Yeah. So just start telling everybody, lie and tell everybody your birthday happens 4 times a year or something. All right, so this is an interesting graph. This is like kind of at how the actual how far the earning will go for you in the economy, okay, is what this graph is. So adjusted for inflation, average weekly earnings for production and non-supervisory workers peaked in the 1970s. So in other words, like the wage that people earned in the peak that you see on the graph was where that same wage could buy them a lot more. Their dollar went a lot further at the grocery store, at the gas station, et cetera, and so forth. So it's gone down over time, and it has its ups and downs, and I think that's a very interesting thing, because when we work for a wage, we have to consider a bunch of things, more or less. We have to kind of predict, if we can to some extent, if the economy is going to be inflationary or deflationary. In a deflationary economy, a fixed wage is great. You make more, your dollar goes further each year in a deflationary economy. In an inflationary economy, that's an invisible tax, right? So if you work for $75,000 a year and the value of every dollar year on year, okay, is worth less, you've now just been taxed further on your wage. You're already getting income tax, but it's an invisible tax. Inflation is an invisible tax for everybody that's a wage earner, okay? So stock market actually will go up and down based on, it's kind of a hedge against inflation, because it's the potential of the company, right, that goes up and down over time, and it automatically has a natural means by which it can adjust inflation. But a wage for a fixed dollar value, $75,000 is an example, in an inflationary economy, that's worth less on the street, right? So a wage earner has a vested interest to really have some type of countermeasure against inflation. One way a wage earner can do it is negotiate your wage to be adjusted for inflation. If you believe that the future is going to be an inflationary period in American history, which, if you follow what's going on, quantitative easing and all that kind of stuff with the Federal Reserve, you would believe that to be true. We're, naturally entering into an inflationary period. So you should negotiate your wage if you just started a new job to be adjusted for inflation over the duration of your employment. So that's kind of bizarre, right?
Or you should spend all your time becoming a non-wage earner.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
get yourself completely out of that game.
Right, so it's, that's a great point. So maybe someone can consider that. Or say, a really crazy arrangement might be something like, I want to be paid in Bitcoin, or I want to be paid in gold. I mean that's kind of far-fetched, but, those type of things.
You could be paid in postage stamps as well.
Paid in postage stamps.
Absolutely. It's currency, isn't it? It is here.
I suppose.
Is it really?
And with the forever stamp,
Yeah.
it has a fixed value. I will take this letter anywhere in the world for this stamp.
So in technology increasing, you'd expect, though, that it's a declining value, because technically, in theory, the price of distributing anything should be going down with the increase in technology.
That's why the cost of a letter has gone down so relentlessly over time. Oh, wait, no, it hasn't. It's done the opposite.
Well, I don't know, how does it stand adjusted for inflation, though? I don't know. I don't know the
The
answer
cost
to
of
that.
sending a letter has gone down to zero, actually.
Call it email. No, there's still an energy cost associated with that.
Basically zero marginal cost, right?
Still, there is an energy cost, and that when we get into these cryptocurrencies, which I definitely want to get as part of this conversation, is that these new currencies actually have some interesting kind of commodity basis behind them, which is energy. It takes a certain amount of energy to mine a Bitcoin, right? And then the blockchain associated with that has to be processed every time that coin is actually transacted. So there's actually an energy cost. So significant, in fact, the Bitcoin miners, they go around, they shop the world for where they can use energy the cheapest, because then they can get on top of the equation of what the cost is of mining a Bitcoin. So what you have to do to mine a Bitcoin is you have to set your computer, the computer itself has to sit there and calculate, churn and churn and churn to try to match a sequence, do an encryption, break an encryption algorithm basically. And all the time and effort it takes the computer to sit there and calculate, then when you mine the Bitcoin, that's the value of whatever the current market value is of a Bitcoin, right? So let's say a current Bitcoin is like $350. Well, you might have used $280 in energy to mine that Bitcoin. Isn't that crazy? So there's actually an energy commodity underlying basis for the Bitcoin.
That's a lot of energy.
Isn't it crazy? Yeah. It's actually...
Is that called embedded energy?
I think that, I don't know what it's called, but that sounds like a good term for it. Let's use that.
There's embedded water. Like if wheat is hauled to Egypt, there's embedded water in growing the wheat.
Sure.
It's
Yeah, there'd
definitely a
be
term.
energy in that as well, because farming is a huge use of fossil fuel because of the fertilizer and all the energy that goes into farm producing. Anyway,
If you're considering universal type of currencies, one of the things that very few people ever discuss is life units.
life units.
It's a commonality that everyone has, and there's value in the term of your life insurance. And you could really move into that category rather easily. In fact, that is the solution to most, in my opinion, of most of the challenges with fiat money.
There was a sci-fi movie about that. They had timers on their wrists.
Sure.
Right? Do you see that?
Oh,
Yeah.
And they pay each other in like lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the movie, but that's a very interesting concept, right? So
Scary idea.
yeah, and when your wrist counts down to zero,
Sure.
you're done. You fall over dead. Yeah. So,
But that's a real commodity that exists today, that existed before the Fed, that is tradable, that is embedded in contracts, that has fantastic value for generational purposes. It's a real commodity that most people have no clue about. It happens today. I mean, I could go buy somebody's life units right now.
for a certain amount per hour.
No, I mean, seriously, I could go buy other people's life insurance policies.
Oh,
Pennies
sure.
on the dollar.
That's right. Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
It's a tradable market. You know, I mean, it's for real, for real.
That's terrifying. So,
It's the solution.
No.
If you could stretch your mind enough, and I know this is not the context of that discussion, but if you could stretch your mind enough, and if you have an appreciation for what the U.S. money economy is about, then that is where the big banks bank.
okay.
They hold trillions in this sector. Everyone does. You can look at the
There's a
FDIC
reason
and
for it, though.
They have that
It's tax-free.
section of Capitalism, a love story. They had exactly that, and it's that the banks take out insurance on people, or even places like the Bank of America, Citibank, AT&T, and Walmart. It was particularly interested that Walmart would take out insurance on their own employees.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they get the money if the employee dies. The effect is, though, they could make the employees go into stress or somehow shorten their lives so that they could get the insurance from it.
it's for real, for real. I'm with you 100% there.
Yeah.
You know, this
So
is-
it does exist.
Do we
but
want that?
It's simply because it washes money. When you get money from a life insurance policy, it's not counted as revenue or income. It is a different kind of thing, and it's taxed differently. So life insurance can just be a laundry machine for money.
Do you know what they call it?
It's actually more than that. It's
Not much.
in the sense that when you started the discussion here, and you had the quote about not taxing generations on your financial activity and through debt and such. Well, it's a fixed time unit that everyone faces, death.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
In
it's
fact,
not-
you know what they call it? It's called the death peasant insurance.
Yes, I'm with you, man. I know
Jesus,
exactly
it's
where you're going
gross.
with that.
So
It's
do we all kind of feel like there's something perverse about that kind of idea? Is
But
it?
it's through it's the vocabulary of it.
Maybe so.
Just like all these categories, the most challenging part about talking about money and finance.
That presented correctly,
anyone
anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is
Just grow up with it.
Okay, well I have, oh please Michael, while I cue this up, go ahead.
A pile of money has an inherent value because it's in a pile.
Okay.
It has the value of the money itself and the value extra because it's in a pile. And the premium goes up as the pile goes up, not just in terms of, I mean, the value of it per dollar in the pile goes up. Now, what's really funny is the expectation of a pile of money has value. You can sell it. You can put it up for auction. That I have the following excuse to believe that there will be a pile of money. And now, if you really do expect it to happen, it's completely legal. If you don't, it's a Ponzi scheme.
Or religion.
Nice.
But the only difference is whether you really believe it.
Yeah, I think there's a point there. Steve, can I hold up just 1 second? I wanted to show this clip. I thought this was would be really interesting for our discussion. I found this and was like, wow, that's pretty good with a lot of things that I don't understand. So let's see if this means anything. If I can get it to play. I know I can.
is that step one, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step two, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence. And then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step 3. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step 4, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again. And the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers, which brings us to step 5, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7, the secret owners take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debt to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class.
Okay. Does anyone in here think that's accurate? An accurate depiction of the money cycle and how it actually works? Yeah. Okay. So who thinks that's inaccurate? An inaccurate depiction?
I think it's both.
It's both? Okay, so maybe it has some...
Well, I wasn't going for perfectly accurate. But
yeah, okay. Please.
I think that it's a complete representation, but it's a representation. And it's not necessarily the representation of how most people operate, but it is the one that people commonly understand is operating.
Okay. So I do believe in this step right here, step 4, where it talks about fractional reserve lending.
Sure.
I've read quite a bit about that. And the way that it works is if you put $100 on deposit, the bank then has the right to take 90 of those dollars and loan them out to other people for goods or services or whatever. And then when those dollars enter the economy, those dollars do indeed get put back in a bank. Typically, most people put their money in a bank. And then that $90 now that you just gave to somebody to buy something from them, they go and they put that in the bank. Now, of that 90% of that 90 can then be loaned out again, and that's where this money gets magnified and created as.
I can take a bunch of those IOUs that I got from people when I loaned them your $90 and bundle them together and sell them to someone.
So, right.
And take $90, like take the whole $100 I get for selling them,
right,
and do the same thing. Yeah.
Right. So that is how our economy creates money. Creates this huge money supply. And indeed, people do work. Most people I know work for money, work for the wage.
So it doesn't actually increase the money supply, right?
Yeah.
Does it?
It does.
Yes. Well, which one? There's M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, and M6. Last I know of.
What is M4?
What is M4?
Yeah.
Do they do away with it?
I've
They
only
combined
heard
them.
of M1, 2, and 3.
They've combined a few recently.
Oh.
But one of the things that, again, because this is a representation that is the most useful for those that are using it.
Sure.
The truth of the matter is, in my opinion, is that we can actually step outside that system today and use an understanding of how we actually are interested in controlling the financing aspect. It's all about financing. Whatever unit you're describing, the whole issue, in my opinion, the historical development of the human species is not technology driven. It's actually how the financing of that technology has been able to mature. And so you can actually step, and that's what End the Fed's all about. If you can step outside that, and we can, today, by refusing to participate. And that means owning your own financing, owning your own debt. So you step outside that.
So in practical terms, what specifically could, let's say, I do tomorrow to accomplish what you're referring to?
Move to Somalia.
Move to Somalia? Okay.
Well, one of the simplest things that most people don't recognize is there's a cost to your money. And people don't ascribe a cost to their money that they use out of their checking account. So I know that my money costs me 34%. That's what I charge myself. When I access my funds out of my wealth, I charge myself. There's a cost to that money. Most people will allow a credit card company to charge them, but they use their money for free.
I gotcha. So basically you're like kind of loaning it to yourself more or less.
I'm self-financing. I am my own banker.
Cool, all right.
And we all have that ability to do that today. That's stepping outside that system. Now that's not to say that I ignore that system. That's not to say that I don't utilize that system. But in the context of me as an individual, I recognize the system for what it is, knowing that I don't want to buy into it as an individual.
So I know a heck of a lot of people, and so do a lot of people in this room know a lot of people that are, and statistics show that an overwhelming majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck.
Sure.
So,
or direct deposit to direct deposit.
Yeah, direct deposit.
Here's the test.
So, yeah.
It's not like we
The
have
test is so simple, it's scary. How much money did you process through your bank account last year? To the penny. How many people know that?
Why not to the penny?
To the penny.
I don't know to the penny.
Isn't that scary? The bank knows. Do they ever send you a statement at the end of the year? Thank you very much for processing X number of dollars through our checking account.
They send me one every month.
Because everybody does it direct deposit and they don't even think about it.
Yeah, and then swipe with the card, you don't actually see the money changing, it's just the
So
numbers.
that test right there, in my, what I found is that it automatically helps me understand where people are. If they don't even recognize the amount of money that's processing through their fingers, then how are they being responsible with their money at all?
Okay, so the first kind of step in the process here is to know where your money's going every cent.
That's right.
Fair enough. That's practical. I don't know who's first.
Well, one thing I would really
Please.
like to hear is, what is the rationale for the banks stopping to pay interest on checking accounts?
Because they can.
Yeah, because they can.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're loaning the money out of a profit, but they're saying we're going to give you zero.
They can actually do the opposite. They can charge you money.
Some do.
For leaving for the privilege of taking care of your money.
You don't have a minimum
They can do
amount.
whatever they want with your money, and you have to hope that they'll give it to you. That's right.
So you got to find free checking accounts. They're out there. Bank of the
It's not
Ozarks.
about the free checking account. It was a different issue. The interest rate actually went so low that banks reached a point where they were charging people for the privilege of holding their money and giving them out dollar for dollar what they put in at a later point. It has to do with the interest rate set by the Federal Reserve, and then banks essentially mark their interest rates as a reference to that, and so whatever they're getting for the money, they can turn around and give you for the money. But if it goes so low, they're not getting anything for the money, they can't give it to you. And in fact, it can get low enough that it goes negative. They're going to charge you for leaving your money in the bank.
The gentleman that made this video, I watched the whole thing. It's like hour long, right? I just showed you one of the summaries in it, for sake of time. And his premise is that, sort of like what, is it Robert? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I can't see. Similar to what Robert's saying here, is like the first thing that people need to do is know how this stuff works. And almost nobody does, is kind of the premise here. And that's what causes all these problems, because nobody knows how all this system works. And they're just victimized by it then, because, if you don't know, you can be taken advantage of. So people are victimized most of their life by this system.
Here's
is what the premise is.
a simple fact that exists today. the United States banks have the ability to print more money than is currently in the money supply today. There is no shortage of money. There's no shortage of ability to finance it.
That would be like saying there's a shortage of inches.
That's right. and that's exactly right. You know, but
Not exactly.
the idea that that's where we're at
Yeah.
is the problem with that system.
Okay, so what we are coming to a conclusion in this quest to find out how it works and then how it should work. We are starting to reach a conclusion that how it works is not maybe ideal for us all.
Oh, it's fatally flawed.
Okay.
Oh, I think it's never been better.
Okay, I have my own personal hobby horse on this subject that I ride, and that is, don't borrow money. Don't borrow money.
Unless it's your own money.
You
Unless it's
communist.
your own money.
Don't borrow your own money, just don't deposit it if you want to use it.
Sure.
But don't put your money anywhere that is going to charge you to give it back. That's ridiculous. And you should know who owns your bank. I know who owns my bank. Me. And some of my friends who are using the bank. It's an investor-owned bank.
Cool.
And
Perfect.
and I still don't borrow money from them. Because borrowing money is deciding that I'm willing to lose some of my money so I can have it sooner.
Well, the time value of money is another thing that we can talk about in the course of this conversation.
But it's only the 90 days worth that all you have to do is pay cash for everything for 90 days, and now you're ahead. And you don't have to borrow money. You don't have to use,
But unless you're charging yourself some cost for that money, that won't work. Because there's still a cost to the money you're using. Regardless of what system you have your money in, you still have to charge yourself
Why? It's in
to
my
use your
pocket.
money. But once you use it, then you're back at I'm using my money at 0%, but yet I have to go out and earn it. I mean, the hardest dollar to get.
No, I don't have to earn it anymore.
Well, that's a fortunate position.
I earned money for a long time, and nobody would loan me money.
So
Because
you
I had
guys,
bad credit.
you guys are all in violent agreement
Yeah.
that the money system in the country, as pictured here, to the extent that this is true, or even if it's not, is somehow bad. Since I'm the only one willing to take the other side, I would offer that empirically, observably, the money system that we have in this country is not only better than every other country by and large, but probably better than at any other time in history. That because of the money system, among many other things, people live better, healthier, longer lives with less effort, less disturbance. Women are in the workforce. Do you know what that means? It means that the workforce is a place that is civilized, that has toilets, that has air conditioning, that where you can go home in the clothes that you go to work in. Women were not in the workplace in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and the 1700s and the 1200s because people were mining and digging for gold and trenching and dying on steel towers. Work was not suitable for women before. We are living cushy lives that can't even be compared to 1913 in so many ways. And it's because of this.
No, it's
Not
because we have
spite of
people
it.
in other countries crawling around.
I venture to
That's
say
the-
that there were more people that had their own skills, where they could maintain a lifestyle that was not necessarily a part of a corporate structure, where you could actually maintain, depending on your heritage and your background. If you came over with skilled labor, if you had skilled labor, you could, in effect, not even be a part of any type of national money system, because you could in fact barter your services and you could live a life. Now, is it to the standard that we find minimally acceptable? Well, in 200 years, they may laugh at how we live and say, how did people live like this?
No, this
So-
is
so does
this
it-
is a fallacy. It ignores the notion that for most of human existence, the primary cause of death is violence. Means that you have to defend your territory, your property,
Pneumonia.
your pickaxe.
I was gonna say, I
your
thought it was
pickaxe,
disease, yeah.
Yeah, pneumonia.
50%. Anthropologically, right? 50% of deaths are violent.
Is that so?
That seems a bit
Well,
high.
we can go and look.
No,
at it.
yeah, I'm not
we
sure.
can go and look
I'm
it
not
up
aware of
very
that.
recently, but the axiom is that it was far more common to die from the four horsemen than it is today. And this notion that you can just go live peaceably in your own little world, in your own little like Garden of Eden, and all you have to do is have a couple of skills, and everybody's going to respect you and treat you well. Good luck finding that reality anywhere on the planet.
I'm not suggesting that.
Or anywhere in history. It never existed.
I'm not suggesting that.
Cosmo.
Well, if it's really important that the value of currency is dependent on what people believe the value of currency is, then it's that being important. What happens when the people just don't value the currency? That it drops. And to me, that the trend since Ronald Reagan, who was another corporate actor, much like our own Trump, a corporate actor, that the productivity has gone way up, but the wages have been flat. And it is becoming more and more apparent that there is a unfairness to that. And people are starting to recognize that. And so when people recognize that this economic system is not fair, then they will not have kind of the loyalty to that dollar, that economic system. And from that, it could crash, and it could crash pretty quickly.
Here's an extreme. An extreme would be that tomorrow we wake up and there's a proclamation that's issued and all US dollars are null and void. We will no longer use that system. It is gone. Is there still value in this country? Is there still activity that will be generated that will be productive and useful and meaningful to the people here? Yeah,
of course.
We just can't measure it.
It's just that, you know, the particular system that we're using, it's mathematically, you know, there's only one company by contract that is allowed to spend more money than it has, and that's a bank. That's it. There's no, you can't do that for any other country, or for any type of country.
Sounds like
company.
you should start a bank.
Well, that's the point. You know, it all comes down to that personal banking, your own self-banking practices, how do you utilize contracts to your favor, and looking at what occurred before the Fed, what was in place before the Fed. Those are the hints to what you can do today. There are contracts out there that were in place that use money as a method of bartering and storage and all that goes along with it, that are available to everyone here today. However, it's only given and only seen by people who think they need it because they have a problem. And the usual problem is, I've got too much money. And then your money problems become real, because if you got too much money, your issue is, where do I store it? And it's only
We
then
sure
you
had that
start.
problem.
And then well, it's a serious problem, because then you have to, then you start, okay, I gotta understand the vocabulary. Okay, now I have to understand the mechanisms of money. Now I have, you know, unless you're at that point, that's not gonna be your focus. Your focus is gonna be, I just need to make enough money to make ends meet, because I got a family to feed, I got, you know, bills to pay, this, that, and the other, and the day is short. You know, it's not until you've got that big problem that you focus. I mean, that's my finding. You know, so that's what led me towards, you know, this type of notion. Not that I have more money or I have that money problem, but I found that an interesting problem. What if I had all this money? Then where would I put it? There's only 3 places you can put money in the United States of America. You could either put it in a commercial bank, you could put it in Wall Street, or you could put it in the insurance sector. And that's it. That's it. There's nothing else. Now you might consider, well, you know, they got all these nice IRA type programs, this, that. Those are just government partnership programs that are a blend between commercial banks and Wall Street.
Well,
Yeah.
I put my money in charities.
It's great. That's where you store your money?
No, I
That's
give it.
You see what I mean? Where do you store? You have to store it somewhere.
I store mine in purchases that I don't yet need. Durable things that I know I'm going to use.
Sure. And then it becomes an issue of liquidity.
I'm not gonna tell you where I put my money.
I don't need to liquidate it, David. I'm going to eventually consume it.
Sure. Because for me, I have an infinite need for cash.
You see, I got no need for it.
I cannot be satisfied with the
That's
amount
not
of
a
cash
need,
I
that's-
have
that's
today.
a desire, not
Well,
a need.
well, and the reason is because I have projects that I'd like to be involved with.
Okay,
If there's a project I'd like to
But
be
that's
involved
not
with.
need, that's desire.
Well, if there's a project I need to be involved with, independent of the cost of that project, you know, and it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a very simple person making 20, 30,000 a year, or you could be a billionaire. It all comes down to the same question. How do I finance it? How do I finance it?
Well,
No, I
there
don't
isn't,
finance
isn't
it.
part of
If I got
that
the money,
sentence
I do
also
it.
it? Somebody else had
Whatever
to
that
create what
project
that it is. So
Pardon?
it's all part of a puzzle, it's not just one thing. It's, you said in that very sentence,
Sure.
you said how finance it.
Sure,
It has to be something.
always.
So someone has to come up with a great idea, there has to be a team to develop it, there has to always be,
Oh, there's-
you know, it's
there's-
never one part.
There's
it's never-
always human activity involved with it.
Sure.
And we're too complicated a society with too many people.
But financing
We
is
can all-
one aspect of that.
Yes, that we can't go back to a barter system, it just won't work.
Sure, fair enough.
You know,
And a
so-
lot of times the it can never come into reality
Wait, I have a
without the
convert.
financing
That's
side.
right. I have a convert. Now we are 2. We can't go back to the barter system. What we have is better than the barter system.
So the question is there other systems that we can move to that would be more equitable? Who believes that the current system is equitable? Meaning like the system serves out everybody.
That's only, I think that's a question you can only ask if you can offer alternative systems. To say, of these
Right.
3, or of these 2,
No.
or of these.
Uh-huh.
Just because I can't think of a better way to get a good deal doesn't mean I'm getting a good deal now.
The Trump system, as far as
Sure.
is fabulously equitable. Everybody is poor. I'm not sure that that's an improvement.
Okay, so in this system right here, in this kind of like model that we kind of said is loosely accurate, we don't know. It's to some degree probably somewhat accurate. Yeah. I don't know what the probability is.
No, it's pretty good.
All right, so let's assume that this is somewhat accurate, or pretty good. Are there people or there agents that interact with in different parts of this system that have a tremendous advantage over other people?
Big time.
Okay. So logically, every single person should have a quest, since money is such a determinant factor in life, it's really intrinsically linked to freedom, right? If you don't believe money is intrinsically linked with freedom, try not having any.
Try not having a banker in your life.
Well, or that.
That would be
Sure.
freedom.
So, you know, there's so many people that are constricted in so many ways because they don't have any money. And there's so many people that are enabled in so many ways, but a lot of people that shouldn't be enabled too, because they have it, you know? And so money becomes, I think, intrinsically linked in the modern era to freedom.
I think that you're using the wrong term.
Okay, well, I can't just go right now to Bangladesh.
I think that credit is the word you should be using.
Okay,
Credit is really the key.
okay.
They have money. If you go to poor countries, they have money. Not a country in the world that doesn't have a currency of some kind, shape, or color. The people have money. If they had more money, it would just devalue the money. What's missing in those countries that are poor that's existent in countries that are rich?
Fair enough, so
is
let's
that
say,
there is a system of credit.
so let's say Bill and I here have about the same in the bank. Okay, let's just say for argument's sake, not to call you out, Bill, you're just sitting next to me, right? Let's say we have the same approximate money in the bank. And, you know, we have an average amount of money in the bank, let's just say. Say we each have close to 100,000 or something in the bank. That's our life savings, okay? Or if we liquidated everything, let's say we both have about 100,000.
Your net worth is roughly both the same?
Yeah, well, yeah, right. And then all of a sudden, and so we have certain lifestyles, we do certain things. Then all of a sudden, somebody hands Bill an unlimited credit card, no limit, right? Don't worry, someone else is paid. It's going to be paid for by somebody else. Don't worry. Use this. It's the golden ticket. You do anything you want with that. It's always good. It's never going to be declined, right? Does he not now all of a sudden have dramatically more freedom in life than I have? Doesn't what he's possible? Isn't he not as limited as I am any longer?
I hear you suggesting that he's entered into a contract with someone who is availing them of their assets, their wealth, and there's got to be, you know, some type of reciprocation that's
No, but he
involved.
just opened up
You know.
a revolving credit account with a really, really stupid guy.
Yeah.
Sure. So he found some way to get this great advantage and just make that the reality. I'm using it as a
Yes,
mental exercise here.
but only relative, right? So ask the other flip question. If I went to Somalia and I gave everybody a credit card, right, that they could run up as long as they wanted, would they not all of a sudden be infinitely rich? And let's assume a closed
I think the
economy.
population of Somalia would be dropping to near
Let's
zero. But
let's call it a closed economy, right? They can't spend it outside Somalia.
They got the airplane.
They have to spend it inside Somalia.
Okay.
And everybody has a credit card that is worth
Okay,
an
so
endless amount.
that's where you tailored the situation, the outcome you
Well, a
want to
closed
see.
economy.
Okay.
Well, if
There
you-
are
if
no
you-
closed
If you
econ-
prefer,
Yes.
There are no closed
Yes,
economies.
yes, there are.
No, there aren't.
Planet Earth is a closed economy at the moment. So let's
No,
just
we have the
give-
Federal Reserve pumping it up. It's not a closed
Let's
economy.
give everybody-
We have imaginary money pumping
If
it
we
up.
gave everybody on Earth a credit card that had no limit, right? We'd all die in a month of starvation.
yeah, well, my analogy, my
But
metaphor.
we would not get rich.
Yeah.
We would not have freedom. We would die because in
Sure.
real terms,
Sure.
There may even be no goods to buy because everybody
the
maxed
wealth
out
of
their credit.
nations, right, has more to do with, earlier we talked about utility and about using it. It's the utility of money that matters, not the having it. And if you can take that money and go and get some bread, that's really good. But if you create a situation where the person who has the bread is not willing to give it to you under any price, the money has no value.
So there's a reluctance here, I'm seeing, to accept that premise that money and freedom are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
Freedom of money.
You know why I think there's a reluctance
There
here?
could be a
Because-
play on that, though. The
I
freedom
believe-
of money or the money for freedom.
relative.
But I believe the reason there's a reluctance to
relative
that is that
freedom.
people, that it's painful to come to that realization.
What's
Because
wrong?
none of us want to believe that we're less free than anybody else. It's painful to experience that, to know that
Relative
fact.
wealth is relatively free.
Yeah, Cosmo?
I wanted to tie this together with ethics. And I was thinking that equating freedom with money kind of like ignores the fact that money is a source of bondage too. That people are like wage slaves and they're bound to it. But I don't really want to think of freedom. It sounds, I've heard the propaganda about capitalism and freedom and money and freedom. And freedom to me is just too fuzzy a word. I think a better way of thinking of it, a better context, a better framework for it is control.
Definitely.
And so I'm thinking that since we've already agreed that money has kind of like, it has value by social agreement, what it does is allow us social control. Now, if you accept that, that's instead of money buys you freedom, money buys you social control. And so anytime you're talking about control, in terms of ethics, you're talking about responsibility. You've got, if you have the control of an action, you're responsible for it. And so that is the tie-in, I think, with ethics. That if you're going to control it with money, you've got responsibility. Not, yeah, a social responsibility too. It's social control, social responsibility.
And that lands you right into contracts. Because, you know, to link both of those stories there, my personal goal, for example, is to have 100% control over all of my wealth. How little, how big, doesn't matter. I just want 100% control.
All you need is a basket.
And so what that means though, and this is, I mean, we're all old enough at this table, I think, to recognize that credit availability was not here like it is today, you know, like it is today. It was not existing 40 years ago. I mean, 40, 50 years ago, I mean, my family grew up on a Sears card because everybody shopped at Sears. They're the only one giving credit, right? Our whole family wore Sears clothes.
What's Sears?
You know, but the point is that, you know, people still lived good lives. People had more control, and people actually had more wealth in-house. The challenge became the availability of wealth. Now, today, the availability of wealth is everyone is looking to satisfy what seems to be, you know, the goal of a great FICO score. Well, if you go that route, then you're saying, I am buying into that system. But not everybody plays that game. My goal with my children is for them to have a non-existing FICO score.
Wait,
you can't operate that way.
A psycho score?
A FICO score. These are the scores people use in order to determine their credit worthiness, in order to get credit cards, car loans, mortgages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
FICO is one of the companies that does it.
Yeah, and so that, I mean, you go anywhere now. That is what people talk about. How to get a better FICO score, I mean, right? I mean, I went bankrupt. My FICO score, I can't do nothing now. You know, I mean, that is a very big conversation that's had by many people at their kitchen table when they're trying to decide what their families can and cannot do in order to satisfy whatever goals they have. But that is a system that is a part of that system that is a choice that you can make. That control that you talk about, people relinquish it to that system because that's all they know. There are other systems. You can live outside of a FICO score. People do it. You can have a non-existing FICO score and be an extremely wealthy person. It's a matter of understanding those three places that you can put money. That's all there is. And recognizing the limitations and the demands that each one of them have upon you by contract. Because once you enter into those contracts with that credit worthiness, then you lose your freedom. You're obligated to satisfy that promise. Right? And so if my goal is to...
No, I disagree. Yeah. Pretty much universally with everything you said.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. I'm just trying to suggest where the masses are. Now, as individuals, I keep saying, I don't want to live like that. As an individual, I don't need to partake into that system. I don't need to, you know, my goal, now, I'm older, I'm 55, so I bought into it for a period of time. I'm still trying to dig myself out of it. However, now I recognize that I want to ensure.
So on some small level, right, there's a bit of preaching that people shouldn't get abortions while you're having sex with
that's nothing to do with the conversation here.
Half their
you know,
age,
those type of moral decisions,
and
you know, are like kind of like a fallacy argument when we're talking about money.
We have, all of us, benefited by virtue of the fact that we're here from a very sophisticated system of credit and lending.
I don't see how you could talk about money and banking and abortions in the same conversation.
Because of hypocrisy.
Is it just me?
Because of hypocrisy. Because when you are benefiting from a system and then condemning it at the same time, it it creates a cognitive dissonance. Now, if a fellow came in here on a camel from Somalia with the clothes on his back that he had woven out of his own personal llama, and he told me that you can also live outside the system, there would be credibility here. But nobody at this table has the credibility to say you should step outside the system and not benefit from the system, the car.
I don't say you can say that, Benjamin. You don't know who I am,
that you
and
drove
you don't
here.
know what I know. So to say that nobody has the
I know
ability
that-
or the know-how
I know that you're wearing.
is actually ignorant, because you don't know me, and so don't
I
place
know
upon
that-
me,
that we are
some type
incapable
of
Well, hold it, one person at a time.
I know that it's
He's going.
impossible to live in this society, to drive a car to this location without having an incredible amount of embedded benefit from a complex system of credit like this one that loaned billions and trillions of dollars to Detroit just to make a car, which you can then buy for a reasonable cost, probably by borrowing some money. Like, all of that happens, and we are entrenched in the American system. It's not the same as it is in Somalia, but very often the reason they're poor in Somalia is because they don't have a FICO score, to be honest. There's a great TED Talk about it. They don't have a system.
They're born in
for-
Somalia because they don't have a FICO score. Is that what you
They're
just said?
poor in Somalia. People are impoverished
If they had a FICO
in
score, they're
developing
poor.
countries because there's no mechanism to help poor people get that first loan, get a goat so they can carry their goods to market or get over the first milestone. And we're here eating off the riches of a complex economic system that has loaned us money, that has loaned other people money around us to build this building and to design the cars and to lay the roads and everything else. We're swimming in an economy that's leveraged on future debts and credit systems.
So the debt
Can't
doesn't matter.
just
Dick Cheney's
sit here
right.
on top of this mountain of a sophisticated economic system and say, you can just not participate. Fine, you absolutely can, but it looks like something. It looks like the guy in Afghanistan who's growing his own cotton and, drinking the milk of his own camels.
So-
It has a particular look. And I'll say, I don't know a lot about you, but you don't look like you're drinking the milk of your own camels. Starting from the shoes,
Where's this
right?
guy coming
It
from?
doesn't matter. So in this scheme, in this idea, back to this kind of map here, right? I'll get to you in just one second, Michael. Is it fair to then kind of be honest with oneself? So if you do learn about how this system works, let's say we've already established this is probably a pretty good example, pretty good model. All right, is it fair for any person to just freeze frame their life, take a snapshot, and have a look, and have an honest look at where they believe they sit in this kind of structure, okay? And then say, I'm in this, maybe this part right here, I work for wage. I work to get a little bit of piece of that currency stream that's coming, right? And then the potency of that is very limited compared to some of the potency other people have. The closer you are to the lending window, from what I understand, when new money is printed or when new money is generated, the closer you are to that generation, the sooner you are in this grabbing that, the more value there is because the inflation hasn't hit yet. So you have the potency. So in other words, if all of us have $1, okay, and then all of a sudden I go through and I give somebody two more dollars in that system, I've just increased the net money supply by 10%. So that inflation doesn't hit until that money starts circulating. Until it starts circulating, then everyone says, whoa, there's more money around, I got to charge more for my stuff. And then inflation lags behind the increase in the currency that gets created, right? That's the way inflation works. So if I'm a bank or some other institution that gets first dibs on that money, boom, I put it in the stock market, I invest it, I have a greater potency of that money, right? So what I'm saying is, it's probably behooves us all, everybody, citizen like the gentleman that made this video suggests, to understand the system quite well, see where we are in that system, and then try to work to some degree to get into the other parts of this system, right? Would that be a wise thing to do, Michael and Cosmo?
I'm 2 or 3 steps back.
That's fine.
Okay, I'd like to contemplate for a few minutes where capitalism came from, who invented capitalism and why. And the historic, does anybody know what well-known historic event immediately preceded the development of capitalism? The Black Death. Black Plague. And the reason was, it was the most demographically flat catastrophe that ever occurred. Lots of rich people died too. It wasn't just poor people. It was, you know, probably not exactly a flat line, but a whole lot of rich people died. And so 20 years later, there was a whole lot of young second and third sons and their families that had a lot of money. And there was a problem because they had lots of land, but they didn't have very many peasants to work it because they all died. Or not, they didn't all die, but 33% of them did. So you had an imposed reevaluation of the value of labor that was indisputable. You had to get people to do things. And in order to do so, well, you had to give them money. And you had a good bit of money. So did everybody else. So the value of the common man's labor skyrocketed. Went up faster than it has in any other 50-year period, ever. And the value of your pile of money plummeted. Because what were you going to do with it? And somebody said, well, listen, why don't you give me that money and we'll form a venture capital corporation and we'll buy a boat. And that was the thing to do with it at the time.
This happened in Netherlands?
This happened all over Europe and turned out to be the age of exploration. And we all built boats, and it cost a lot of money to build a boat, and a lot of labor, and you got to insure them, and it was a big, so we form a venture capital company, and off they go, and 52% of them come back with wealth beyond the dreams of the wealthy, and 48% of them are never seen again. But it turned out that the concept of pooling money I can't spend, I have more than I can spend, because even the wealthy in those days spent their money.
Is that the same event time-wise as the stock?
That's when stock companies were first invented, yes.
I think that starts in Amsterdam. I'm not sure.
Well,
the Dutch company?
It started in Portugal, because they were the first of the explorers, and but it spread, and the Dutch said, whoa, nifty idea. Because we have a big port. And so then a whole lot of things got started then. But the idea that the capital, the pile of money has more value than the money in the pile. And that's where it started.
1500?
So, yeah, 1500. 1470 was when it started.
The most powerful thing that I hear you saying, Michael, the most powerful thing that I hear you saying is something I completely agree with. And that is that there are elements of social change in small pockets that will have dramatic impact upon people's lives in 5 or 10 years or 15 years. And so those single
the only individual, I disagree entirely with that summation, because the only reason it was so powerful was it happened all over Europe.
Well, Europe being one small part of the world.
Well,
and so that impact is now worldwide.
But Europe was a separate economic system from Asia at the time. That's because there used to be isolated economies, because we didn't have the technology.
I'm just drawing off what you're sharing.
Okay, but I'm just saying it wouldn't have helped if just Amsterdam had the plague. They wouldn't have, but it's the fact that all over Europe you had a reduced workforce, an increase in available cash, and valued valued things that you can't produce, like land. And that there were suddenly a whole lot of money and not very many people to hire for it. You couldn't get labor because they'd all died. And so people could move. People could afford to go 350 miles across Europe because they knew of a place where they were paying a lot better than you are. You know, they're gonna give me 6 times what you're gonna give me for a day's work. And the thing is that that's what it takes to redo that balance of the very, very wealthy versus the common laboring force. You have to have, first you have to have an increase in the wealth of the wealthy, but then you have to have an increase in the value of labor. And that has to come from the laborer themselves. It can't come from anybody else.
Is the
They have to
technology forcing that to
Chris,
zero?
will you go back a slide?
One slide ahead? Back.
No, I mean, people have to be willing to say, no, I won't work for you puny $16.50 an hour. I want 28. I don't want just a little bit of a raise. I won't even walk through your door for less than 28. And then, if they wait and somebody else comes in and is willing to work for $16.50, well, you're out of luck. But if you have a nice play or something like that, then
I want to hear what Cosmo's going to say, but before we leave your point, do you see this chart starts really high and then it goes down, but it peaks. My theory on why that goes so high is World War II.
In 1970?
That's 1975.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's all higher and it's climbing out, and we can't see all the way back to 1945. But there was, after World War II, a huge premium on American industry, which is kind of a
Well, that was
shorthand for.
that started before the war. We built American industry because we needed.
Well, there was the equivalent of plague on industry in Europe, which was the bombing of during the war.
So let's jump into Cosmo's comment, and then we're going to shift our creative minds to this idea of how we might be able to do this better. Brainstorm that out.
Well, I may be leading that charge because the question I bring to mind is, how am I, as a consumer, going to spend my money? And one of the things that I have been experimenting with, and I pretty much came to the conclusion that culturally we're kind of like looking for the best deal, and the best deal is the best product at the cheapest price. And I have become disenchanted with that. I'm looking for a fair deal. And so it may actually be that somebody is going to be charging me less than I think that it deserves, and I will actually pay them more than they asked for. Now, how does that play into kind of like social responsibility? Well, one of the things is de-chaining, not to buy things from chains if I can avoid it. I saw in my small city of Tahlequah, Oklahoma, when I was there, city of about 12,000, that the mom and pop shops died when Walmart came in, and it was tragic. So, de-chaining. Another one, and I'm going to put this link, is the shopping guide. Now, the shopping guide gives you the listing of different corporations that make different products, lots of them. And it shows you, like, how this corporation stands in terms of like the environment. What's its environmental impact? What is its corporate culture like? And so I want to become informed about products and giving money to corporations. Not so much for the best deal, but because these corporations are exemplars of what, like, a fair deal, of treating their workers well does. It's kind of like consumer responsibility. And I'd be open to other ideas about being ethically responsible consumer.
So that's a great lead into what we can do to improve the system from a consumer. I can't stand that word, but from a purchasing standpoint, purchasing power, there's probably a lot we can do to have our dollar speak in that system when we do go to purchase something. We could probably collectively, I know for sure, if majority of people started to put their purchasing power in certain areas, that would definitely influence industry. I mean, definitely. If a genuine boycott of some product happens, that has major effects on, in the past. I've read about boycotts that were highly effective, changed the practices of companies and how they operated. So back to this deal right here. How could we now, instead of an individual level, go back to that, talking about what we could do, like each of us, okay, to make this system better, or maybe make the system work better for us. The consumer side of it, I think, is great. If we were legislative body, right, and we wanted to improve on this system, what the first thing I would do personally, I'll just lead this exercise, is I would say, I don't think that, I see this system as being very advantageous to some and really disadvantageous to others. Others have major disadvantages, and I would like to see a system that was across the board more equitable and work for the majority of people, as many people as possible, not for a select few. So we see over history, right now, I believe in history, there's a greater discrepancy of wealth than there ever has been in the history of the world, from what I understand. I think some people in previous meetups have brought that point up, kind of. A certain number of people control, incredible amounts of wealth and resources. I forgot who brought that statistic forward one time, but I remember it was brought forward.
So before we get too far down that field, right, all of us benefit from higher levels of medical care
Yes.
than the King of England 50 years ago.
And my personal attribution to that is technology.
Of course, but the point is technology has provided a kind of lifting of all ships in ways that may render this comparison moot. Yes, it's a number, yes.
Oh, well, my belief on that.
Yes, there are differences of wealth, and yes, they're obscene when measured in dollars, but
yeah.
in things that might matter a lot more than dollars, the poorest person in America can walk into an emergency room and be sitting down in an MRI machine and get real care.
I couldn't agree with you
more.
And
the Kings of England, going back 500 years, couldn't even get a shot for pneumonia.
I believe personally that the application of technology is going to be the defining thing for humanity. That's, in a nutshell, that's my whole belief. You guys know with technology, philanthropy, and all that stuff that I've been talking about is that, I couldn't agree with that statement more. Right now, I'm dealing with this system. I'm in this system. So is everybody else from the monetary perspective, right? So technology, huge. I think overshadows this. To what you just said, to your point. This particular system, I guess we have to start from this point. Is having a very smaller and smaller number of people be richer and richer and have more possession of more material wealth in this world a good thing, or is that a bad thing? Please.
So there's 6 people in this world, 6, that own the same amount of wealth as 3.5 billion people.
Okay.
Half the world's population, 6 people own that much wealth.
So now we ask the question, is that good or bad? Okay, so why is it bad? Why is that bad? Whoever said that.
Too
Did you say
much
it, Steve?
power.
That's too much of a concentration of power?
Yeah.
Does money equal power?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people would agree with that. I think I agree to that to some extent. Who said yeah? Who said bad? Steve, why did you say bad?
It's disproportional. It's
Disproportionate.
too much concentration of power, and it's too few people.
Okay. Michael?
Power is defined as the ability to do work. That's the physics definition of power.
Okay.
And money is a measure of the ability to accomplish work.
Okay, fair enough.
So, yeah, money is power.
Okay. So are we in agreement, or does someone have a counter opinion that that's actually good?
I feel like you'd go on without hearing the flip side if I didn't offer it. So the benefit of having
But wait, is
Michael-
it what you believe? First, not to interrupt you, but is it what you actually believe, or you're just proposing a counterpoint?
I would be equally scared of a world in which the wealth was equally distributed to people,
Really?
regardless of their, regardless of their merit and their quality and their ability.
So you think those 6 people got that money because of their merit? They have more value to the human race than 3.6 billion other people?
So we've had people for years, and going back for always, the kings of Europe, etc., who had power, and whether it was expressed in terms of dollars and cents, or whether it was expressed in terms of armies and popes and crusades and whatever, this sort of power has always been hierarchical, and it has always eventually come to a point. And on the top of that point, there's a person, and we say that that person has this power, this person has this money. In reality, it's a little bit different, but let's take just a couple of obvious cases, Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates is spending money in a very intelligent way to try to mitigate the effects of mosquitoes causing malaria in Africa and AIDS and other things. Now, I would hope, and I will be wrong, but I would hope that many of the people who are in that list of 6 are in fact putting that money to good use. And the question for me is, are they putting that money to better use than the average person, if you were to have distributed all that money averagely? You know, there's a lot of people in the world that wouldn't spend a dime on mitigating malaria in Africa. And maybe we do need to have the ability to work together as large groups of people to solve particular problems, particularly when they affect large groups of people. And that requires a certain amount of marshaling of resources that has the appearance of a hierarchy. So there is room for it. Could we maybe get away with a little bit less than the numbers of being as drastic as you say? Probably so. But would a flat distribution of wealth be advisable? No, I think that would be a colossal failure.
So is this extreme distribution of wealth, should it be tamped down? Should it be swung back in the other direction to where there is greater distribution of wealth? That's the question.
So I think that it is what it is.
Okay, that's easy. That's
As
true.
As a person, you know, as we sit here,
Yeah.
it exists. What I see as valuable is that these individuals have shown or know of a path that they have taken that has managed their families to benefit in a huge way. And so there's the gift.
Sure.
Is to take a look at it for what it is, recognize what it is, that how they structured themselves and how they've managed themselves in such a way, and I would venture to say that it's through contracts, and it's through the power of contracts, especially in banking, in those 3 areas, that have allowed them to gather all that wealth.
What's the greatest? Sure,
so
fair enough.
It's really all about, for me, taking what they've done and trying to understand how I can use that for my benefit and my
Sure.
ability for my family to also grow.
Fair enough. So
Now-
the greatest predictive index on where someone's going to end up is
That's
where
right.
they're born, right?
That's right.
What they're born into. So the womb lottery is real,
Yeah.
right?
Well, there are people who, inherit wealth,
Right.
but they also inherit a system of wealth.
Of course they do.
That's the power. It's not the wealth.
I couldn't agree with you more. So the best thing you can do for your kids is to be independently wealthy and have the system work for you. So because it's more, then it's going to work for them as well. They're
That's
gonna
right. So
inherit
you
that
have
system.
to, in my opinion, if the joy
Mhm.
or the fun or the goal, whatever that is to try to figure that out. Now, if you're able to do so and we can here in the United States, follow that path also. That's the beauty of it.
Statistically, we can't, but
Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree that some can.
The
but
potential is
statistically,
there.
we can't.
It's a
Potential
matter
is there,
of
sure.
education and most importantly, discipline. Now, does everyone have the same education and discipline towards understanding what's going on? That's, another, topic. But in terms of just money, and in terms of wealth, and in terms of the amassing of wealth,
Right.
there's no secret here.
But statistically speaking, the percentage chance of someone going from poverty to riches is extremely low, and it's lower than it's ever been.
Depending on what you mean, it's all
It's just
relative, of
statistically,
course.
I'm talking about the masses. I'm just
Yeah.
talking about statistics.
I think, that it's more easier for someone who has less income to be financially successful than it is for a wealthy person to be financially successful.
So why don't the statistics line up with that?
It's a matter of perspective, right?
Statistics are a matter of perspective?
Well, I'm talking in terms of what that means in terms of financial freedom.
Okay.
Okay, now, if financial freedom means I must be able to have this huge amount of money, then great. If my financial freedom means that I am obligated to no one, which is more valuable? That's value then, see? That's the moral, ethical thing,
Okay,
right?
sure.
Not everybody wants to buy into that type of lifestyle or the obligations. Having money is
And
work.
I don't want to.
Having money is a lot of work. The more
Yes,
money
fair
you
enough.
got, the more work you gotta do.
No, I don't either.
More money, more
I don't
problems?
have to do more.
I don't want to
All these people
get
who
on
have
that
massive
gravy
amount of money
train.
have teams of people that they employ.
No, I don't need to do that.
Hundreds of people that are used in order to
Right.
maintain that.
Well, Cosmo's been waving here, so let me
Sure.
jump in here.
It's, I don't want to go there. The goal for me is not to be independent. I'm a dependent person. I love people. People love me, I hope.
We love you.
I'm trying to help people out. I don't want to be the richest man on the block. I have taught in a school that specialized in juvenile delinquents from the very rich. They have got problems.
Affluenza.
Affluenza. They had problems. They didn't know how to do anything from them. Never had gone camping before. They had everything they wanted, and they were drugged out and did anything they wanted. They had no discipline at all. I don't want to go there. It's kind of like that the problems of the rich are like suspicion about other people trying to steal their money, take their money. Suspicion about, is he really my friend or is he just doing that to get my money? The kind of like the pride, the arrogance of saying, I deserve this, when you may have inherited it. You didn't deserve, those 5 people don't deserve half the wealth of the same amount of wealth of the half of the world's population. It's not deserving at all.
So the economic mobility of people is an index, is a measure that we would probably look at.
I don't want to go up that high.
Well, you don't necessarily want, it's not about that, it's about the possibility of doing it.
But if it exists, I mean, are you suggesting we take all that from them?
Well, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? To each his own. To some people, acquiring more wealth might make them very happy.
Well, I think that our culture is brainwashing us, and one of the reasons why kind of like this corporate mentality is someday I may get to be one of those rich dudes and suck it to everybody else.
Maybe so. Maybe it is a brainwashing. I know that in the course of my life, I've understood to be brainwashed or extremely have ideas that didn't turn out to be true.
I don't know whether their progressive ranks are still in the top 10 or not, but Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are on everybody's list of fabulously wealthy people.
Jeff Bezos.
Neither one of them inherited any significant amount of money.
Is that so?
I'm going to disagree.
What?
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree. Bill Gates' father was a patent attorney,
Yes.
which is why Bill Gates made the moves that he did in the early 80s.
That's where he learned that I should own this stuff if I wrote it, yes.
Yeah.
But that isn't, he didn't inherit that. He learned it from his dad. That's not the same thing. He didn't get a pile of cash from daddy.
But it's still then definitely a component of the womb lottery like we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying that privilege doesn't give benefits to those who are privileged. I'm not saying that at all. But talking about it as inherited wealth is somewhat different,
Sure.
okay?
Yeah,
But the fact is, when Bill Gates gave away more money last year than anybody's given away in any other previous year, just like the year before, people don't pay attention to the fact that 38% of that money used to belong to Warren Buffett. Because Warren Buffett donated the largest gift ever given to a charitable foundation, to Bill Gates.
Ralph Nader wrote a book called Only the Super Rich Can Save Us, and it talks about that exact phenomenon. Let me interject here. So to this idea of going back to this, how can we make this better? I have an idea. I think we can make this better by instituting a system called baseline socialism. What baseline socialism is nobody goes without food, nobody goes without clothing, shelter, or any medical care or any necessity of life, ever. Period. Across the board. It's becomes a universal human right across the board. Okay? Then let capitalism and consumerism and whatever dog eat dog world after that, but everybody has guaranteed base. Because if someone's living paycheck to paycheck and they lose their job for some reason that's even outside of their control, they can find themselves in a downspin where they lose their house, they lose everything, they're living out of their car, their family, their kids suffer. That's a barbaric system. Okay? Nobody should ever be pinched into that kind of scenario, in my opinion. Yeah, please.
So you realize the concern is that so many people would refuse to work under that scenario that literally the economy would come to a halt.
So that's your viewpoint of humanity?
It's not true.
Is that your view of humanity? I would still go to work every day because I love to work. I would then be working because I love to, not because I have to. And my work would be, my work and my life would be inspired. People's work and their lives will become inspired because they're not doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they want to. And that's a completely different spirit to everything that you do every day in your life, right? Am I wrong with that? Is that a true statement you believe or a false statement?
I agree.
I think that this was already brought into existence, I think, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's the second Bill of Economic Rights. And we haven't even gotten there yet. And it's all outlined in history, look it up. And it was strange because the folks who went, after Second World War, the folks who were associated with Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to Germany and Japan and brought that economic rights, Bill of Rights, to those countries, and they instituted in those countries. But they didn't do it here. So now those countries are better off economically than we are.
That's
They are
not
demographic-
my memory.
yes.
My memory was that Germany invented socialism under their Otto von Bismarck, and then the rest of Europe adopted it over the course of time.
It's not a
The
smooth. It
minimum
wasn't
baseline Bill of
it
Rights,
wasn't
read
a-
Otto von Bismarck.
It wasn't a smooth line.
That's where you're gonna find it.
Yeah, it was interrupted by National Socialism, which is an entirely different piece.
A small hiccup.
So if we interjected this model of baseline socialism into this type of system, we could start to probably break some of those statistics that, like I put forth about the womb lottery, right? the biggest predictive index of where you're going to end up in your life financially and how well off you're going to be, the most predictive, the highest percentage correlation is your parents, how your parents are. You're more likely to end up like your folks than any other way. It's just the way that it
Talking
pans
about
out.
religion?
Excuse me?
Are you talking about religion?
No, I'm talking about how affluent you are in terms of cash.
Happens to be
worth.
really true of religion.
And so these things are generationally, intrinsically entrenched. For example, the African American community has 1/10 of the net household wealth. So right now, the average household wealth of a white family, okay? So if they liquidated all their assets and came up with a pile of cash, the average in the United States right now per household is $150,000. For an African American household, it's $15,000. That's 10 times differential between those two groups. And you see generational and entrenched poverty within these cultures and within these subcultures and within these generational effects, okay? Well, if we have a baseline socialism, nobody has to worry about where their next meal is coming from or whether or not they're going to have a roof over their head. Imagine how your inability to then really get a hold of your finances and really understand these complexities and all these kind of things. When you're worried about how you're going to find the next food, where your next meal's coming from. I'm not worried about where my stock portfolio is doing when I'm looking for a meal. I'm starving. I'm not going to worry about where the stock market's going, right? I mean, come on. So we have to have this like base in order to have all these, additional things on top of it.
So there are 7 billion people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
5 billion of whom probably are living, at least 2 billion, I think, are living below $10 a day. I think something like that.
Yes.
And you want to fund bringing them up to $50.
Yes, and I want them to take it out of my pocket.
Minimum.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's a daunting number. So I'm curious about.
Take it
is
away
there
from
any
the
realm in which this is possible? This is a little bit.
I don't want to Robin Hood go take it from the rich and give it to the poor. That's not what I want to do. Take it out of my pocket. Because that person's a hell of a lot likely to be able to do something great in their life than if they're starving to death or don't have shelter and don't have the basics. Yeah, you're in too, right? And when you start going around the world and you're talking to people, and majority are in. A majority are in. Mm-hmm. And you talk to these people at the top, right, of the food chain, really talk to them, they're kind of in too. Warren Buffett says, Warren Buffett has said a lot of things along to those lines, And so I think humanity in general is kind of in on that. And that's where these kind of systems should start to move in that direction. That represents that. And it's a massive change. It would be very disruptive, but I think it'd be much more equitable than it is right now.
There was a guy, I guess about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little longer ago than that, who got a Nobel Prize in economics for a suggestion for how to deal with people in cultures and political systems who are in abject poverty and have been for a generation. And he came up with this brilliant idea. Let's loan them money. And he set up this thing in 2 countries where he had a lot of contacts in world economics, and he used this thing where he would find in a village, and he would go to the village and he would ask them, who's the wisest woman in the village? And he would find somebody whose name came up the most often, and he would say, listen, there's 250 people in this village and I've got $2,500, and I want to give it to you, and I want you to loan out the $2,500, and I want you to set up whatever payback system you think will work. And when you get to the point that they've paid back their loans, then call me back and we'll talk about doing it again. And the fact is, the default percentage was lower than Wall Street's.
Microloans, right?
Yeah, $100.
Nobel Prize.
Okay, thank you.
It goes back into 2006. The main driver being the ability to finance things.
Yeah, and the thing is that this was, most of these were close to zero interest, but not zero. They were at low interest rates, but it was all based on, okay, you come to this wise woman, and her questions are, well, what are you going to do with the money? Well, how are you going to pay that?
The success of that program, in addition to laying out a system of financing activity, was also helping people to understand the concept of capitalizing on the investments.
Well, and it was also, the fact was that it's a pragmatic answer.
Big time.
There are hundreds of millions of very poor people. So for $100 each, that's only 10 billion. You know, which, pardon me, on the scale of international programs, this is peanuts.
Gotcha.
And that's what they did. And they didn't, the guy's answers for so many of these questions were somebody went, well, how are you going to tell if they're paying it back? How are you going to, and he's like, we're not going to tell. We're not going to, you know how much it would cost to keep track of all those loans? We're going to lose some of them. That's how we're going to get, that's how we're going to deal with it. Sometimes we're going to take a bath. And sometimes we're going to get paid back. And some of the people who pay us back are going to be doing it out of a newfound sense of wealth. And they're going to make their own loans.
It's all sounds, I didn't know anything about that. I have to go read about that. It's fascinating. So next week will be the second version of this second installment of Money. When we talk about Islamic lending, we're going to talk about, expand on this idea of baseline socialism. We're going to talk about other economic models, such as what they do in the Nordic countries with some of their social programs and what kind of benefits they've received economically from those. Because it was mentioned tonight, I would like to take a deeper look at the FDR and that model that got brought to Japan and to Germany. That's another thing I'm not up on. So probably pull that in as well. And then,
I don't know. I just know that the people who built the economy of Japan came from the United States because they'd been told, you know, you can't do that. No, that's terrible. Oh, that wouldn't work. Oh my God. You're a socialist, aren't you? And, you know, the Japanese didn't know the word for a guy who helps everybody out at the bottom first in hopes that it'll make the country better. They didn't know that was a dirty word. You know.
So I will rely on you to send me a couple of links. Both of you. Yeah.
Oh, both me?
And so which is great. Yeah. Send me some links on those content so we can add the deeper detail of that next time. And then the other thing is going to be credit unions and alternative banking, non-traditional, non-big banking, and what kind of benefits that are therein as well. And that ties into then what we can do in this model to improve it from an individual standpoint. So we'll talk about that. So next time will be Money version 2, and I want 2 more minutes of your time. We started 7 minutes late, so we'll end 4 minutes late and make up the time that way. I have a folder over there, Tracy, that's got a, yes, you just grab that, pass it around, everyone take one out. Everyone needs a pen, so you can pass some pens with it. And what it is that I got a lot of feedback, and I decided to try to get a little more. So it's just a survey, fill it out. It's 11 questions, they're all single sentence questions. I'm sorry asking you